You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Frank Saravalli, welcome to the pod, my man. How you doing?
What is it, DFO hoodie day? I just didn't know it.
You know what's funny? I think Ty's wearing his hoodie too.
Yeah, but if you, I don't know. If I had known both of you had yours on, I definitely wouldn't have worn it.
Yeah, well, at least you have a blue one on. So
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's
I don't
funny.
know if
Honestly,
that absolves us from this sartorial error here.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about it's classic. We all wore the same hoodie.
Starting
you know what,
this
though?
show.
It's comfy, man. I'll tell you right now. This is one of the, and you know what I like about it is because the hoodie's tight around the neck. I hate the floppy hoodies. They're the worst.
You like the choker?
Well, a little bit. To each their own. So it's all good. Hey, there's lots going on. The Cachuck family pretty happy as Brady Tkachuk signs a pretty big deal with the Ottawa Senators, and Sens fans, it seems the reaction all pretty positive.
Is it? I mean, I think they're happy to have him. I think they're not sure about the cap hit. It's almost $8.3 million once you factor in the fact that the deal was signed after. It's a little CBA wrinkle that I love. The deal being signed after the opening day of the season slightly changes the AAV. So what's important for the Cachuck family is $57.5 million for Brady. He's a wealthy young man. And what's important for the Sens is that this is done by opening night. He's in the building, he's signed, and you can get him on the ice as quickly as possible. This isn't something that lingers for a franchise that, as Scott Burnside wrote on dailyfaceoff.com yesterday, it really helps starting to shed the label of dysfunction because, there had been so much talk over the last number of years about Eugene Melnyk and his impact on the franchise in such a negative way. And I think Pierre Dorion has tried his best dealing with the cards that he's been dealt, trying to navigate around some of the different restrictions and things that are in place. And so holding firm on getting Brady Tkachuk on a long-term deal, 7 years. And then in addition to that, no signing bonus money. To me, when you watch the Sens, he's the heartbeat of that team. He's the engine. He's the guy that drags everyone else into the fight. And oh, by the way, he's only going to continue to increase in terms of his production as he gets more and more comfortable in the NHL. I think this deal makes all the sense in the world for a team that has so much runway with their cap space to now achieve cost certainty with their best forward.
Yeah, I look at Cachuck, and I do believe that in a few years, you're going to see a much more complete version of him. He's a pretty big man. He's still very young, and there's still the kind of that filling out your body and just getting to maximize the strength. And I think that's what you're going to see in the future from Cachuck. He's a heart and soul player. I think his skill level will continue to improve. Thomas Chabot might be more valuable to the team because of the minutes he plays, but I really look at Brady Tkachuk and Stützle as kind of a duo. And Stützle in the future, I think, is going to be maybe the more offensively gifted of the two, but Kachuk's a player who will complement him very well and definitely protect him. So I agree with you, Frank. I think it's a signing that Ottawa needed to have. There hasn't been a lot of positive things in that organization for a while. So they got that guy signed. They got Batherson signed. They've got Chabot signed. Obviously, Stützle will have a few more years before
look at the guys they have coming. I love everything that they're building there. Josh Norris had a fantastic year last year. I think Shane Pinto's an under-the-radar Calder Trophy candidate for this season. Jacob Bernard-Docker, all these other guys that they still have coming in the pipeline. You talk about Sanderson being elite of the elite on the back end, and Tyler Boucher that they grab in the first round this year. I mean, this team, they have every positional box checked, it seems like, and lots of depth at those positions as well. It's almost like a matter of time. How quickly can we develop these guys and get them here and turn our team around? And they're obviously going to make a big step in that direction this year, winning their first game against the Leafs, although a little bit in fluky fashion on their opening night. But to move forward, where do they slot in the Atlantic Division this season? How close can they get?
Yeah, I kind of see them as sixth, maybe fifth. Maybe they can move up to fifth, but I think it'd be harder to go any higher than that this season. We'll see. Now, crazy night, kind of the first really busy night of the National Hockey League season last night. 9 games played. There was an average of 4.1 goals per team last night. You had the power plays combined across the league last night, Frank, went 30%. Right now, it's funny though, the teams in the East had way more power plays than the teams in the West. Seattle and Vegas and Arizona, they're like getting 2 or 3. Yeah, Pittsburgh had 9 power plays last night in that Florida game. Is kind of crazy to watch, but lots of goals early on last night. And you know what? Robin Leonard said it, like Vegas, it's very early, but man, in 2 games, they've kind of looked meh.
Yeah. I mean, I could see it. I could kind of see it coming in that sense. Like, yes, I picked Vegas to win the division, but there were a lot of changes there. And you take out a heart and soul guy like Fleury, it leaves a dent. It's left a dent on their fan base for sure. I didn't really understand the Evgeny Dadonov acquisition, given the team has limited cap space. Perhaps I'll be proven wrong on that one, but I think there's some question marks, as much as I'm a fan of Robin Leonard and what he's doing off the ice, about his ability to carry this team for 50 plus games this season.
Yeah, well, their team defense last night was not ideal. And hey, how about Anze Kopitar? Anze Kopitar just shredding them. And it was interesting. The Kings' whole strategy when they brought in Philip Deneau was that they felt it would open up Kopitar for some more offensive situations. And for one game, they were looking like geniuses. Kopitar was unreal.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because I flipped on NHL Network this morning and I'm watching the highlights. I go, wow, Philip Deneau paying immediate dividends, even though he's not the guy scoring the goals. Just funny to think about his impact in lessening the matchup requirements, the ask of Anze Kopitar, and to open up all of that offensive flow that he had in his game 2-3 years ago. To see that back again, even just in one game, a little flash, is certainly encouraging for Kings fans. And
Bertuzzi, 4 goals. I guess the only negative about scoring 4 goals on opening night is your team loses. Like that's Matthews, now him. It's kind of an odd stat to think. And I'll say this about Tampa Bay. Right now, they are the best team when they pull their goalie. There's no question about it. They're, what is that, 4 goals now with the goalie?
Yeah, but how many did they gave up? At least 2 against Pitt.
3 actually against Pitt.
So are they? I mean,
they are. Well,
they're actually -1 for that first game. So
yeah, but when you score, Frank, that many goals, 6 on 5 in 2 games, obviously it's easy to give up a goal because the guy just has to shoot it. And especially, did you see the 3 empty netters? Like most of them are from Pittsburgh side of center. I'm just saying right now, 6 on 5. Tampa Bay, like obviously, I don't think they're happy with how they played in the first 55 minutes of both of those games. But, Detroit, I don't know if that's going to be a microcosm of their season, but they should have won that game. They're up 6-3 with 6 minutes to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, when you look at the only thing I really like about it for hockey fans is just John Cooper's willingness to try.
Yes.
To pull the goalie that early. I mean, you saw it. It was like 6 minutes and 5 seconds left in opening night. And like you could tell Sean McDonough was calling the game on ESPN. He hadn't called hockey, I think, in 15 or 17 years. And he's like, whoa, John Cooper. Like, I guess he wasn't expecting it. And, the analytics say the quicker you can get the guy out of there when your team's out of it by multiple goals, the better chance you have. And so when you saw them score right away, you're like, okay, this makes sense. And look, I'm always a big fan of pulling the goalie early, because what's the difference if you lose by 2 or if you lose by 5? No. Like it doesn't, as long as you're losing, it doesn't matter, but at least you're giving your team a chance to get back in it.
And Seattle Kraken, of course, you see it in the woodjersey.com studio. It's our new woodjersey.com, and I think it's fitting that we have the Seattle one up because Seattle welcome to the NHL on 2 fronts. They get their first win last night against Nashville, and they have their first for their fan base controversial call that goes against them. They didn't like it. And I really don't think it was clear that it was a kick-in goal for Stevenson in the Vegas game. If it was called no goal on the ice, I don't think there was enough to overturn it. It was called a goal on the ice. I don't think there was enough to overturn it. But quite a 48-hour span for Seattle fans. Tough loss and then a big win in Nashville.
Yeah, and look, all the excitement just to see the post-game locker room video, Dave Haxtell congratulating the guys. You saw before he even walked off the bench, he's like, puck, get the puck. They're going to frame that one somewhere. And so honestly, I was super impressed with the Kraken this week. Not just the win in Nashville, but also what they dealt with in the 48 hours before their first game in Vegas. Such a tough place to go into and play anyway, but the COVID situation, and then to be out of it and come back, down 3-0 to claw your way back into it. That really said a lot to me about this team, about the group that they have assembled. And no one knows what's in store for this team this season overall. But if you fight like that and you care like that, I think that's going to help that team immensely.
Oh, no question about it. What did you make quickly of Gary Bettman?
By the way, can we talk quickly about the kick goal thing? Like,
yeah,
every goal like the Stevenson goal should be in it should count every single time.
Well, the Western Hockey League has that rule. If anything that's not, you can kick it in as long as you're not in the crease. So anything from outside the crease, kicking motion's allowed. It's very clear, right? So the only time it's going to be debated is if a player has their foot in the crease. Like, to me, that's an easy rule if you want to implement it. Because I'm with you, Frank. If suddenly guys at full speed can pretend they're Pele or Alphonso Davies, for a more recent reference, if they want to do that, I'm all for it. Because it's not like suddenly we're going to have guys out there trying to kick goals in.
Well, yeah, to use your own reference, I don't know if we want guys Peleing out there, wearing skates, but I mean, I think teams noticed that situation in the Vegas game with Stevenson, because you look at the Sens Leafs game last night, they did not challenge. They were like, hey, perhaps we saw this goal that was allowed in Vegas, and there's not really any point in challenging.
No, and I'm with it. I'm with you, Frank. To me, it's kind of a skill play. It's smart. You're thinking on your toes, no pun intended, and you redirect it. You lift your foot, whatever it is. Yeah, I'm all for it. I know Seattle was upset about it, but I didn't think it was egregious by any stretch. I know that the rule's probably a little bit gray in how it's worded, but you could easily solve that by adapting the WHL rule.
I mean, the rule book is purposely vague. I think that's everyone's consternation and issue with it is it's written that way on purpose. A lot of things could be cleaned up if they just cleared up the language.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Hey, let's welcome in to the woodjerseys.com studio. Tyler Yaremchuk joins us for another rip-roaring edition of Buy or Sell.
Just another guy wearing a hoodie.
Yeah, and I was really debating taking it off because I was like, oh, okay.
You don't want to be that guy.
Well, I mean, when we all got on the call, like, I mean, why do I have to be the guy who changes, right? I don't know. Anyways, Buy or Sell is brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash, where you can use the promo code RundownDD. If it's your first time using the app, use that code. You get 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order. Let's jump right into Buy or Sell, the Brady Tkachuk deal. I saw, a few people took the chance to kind of crap on the Senators and say, there's no chance he plays out that entire contract there. They're going to end up having to trade him at some point. I'm going to say Brady Tkachuk does play out the entire new extension with the Senators franchise. Frank, you buying or selling on that?
I'm buying. I mean, it sounds funny to say, but 7 years goes by in the blink of an eye. They're going to take another 2 to 3 years to really get towards where they want to get to. And I think in 3 years' time, the Sens are going to be legitimate Stanley Cup contenders. And they're going to be that way for a number of years, which is going to keep him glued in there trying to chase that prize.
Legit Stanley Cup contenders. Wow.
Yeah,
I like
100%. That team is going to be really, really good.
Okay. All right. I like that. Yeah, I think he's playing it out. How often do teams sign young guys out of their entry-level deal to 6, 7, 8 years and that player gets traded? It's pretty rare.
Jack Eichel.
Yeah. But if Jack Eichel doesn't have this surgery, right, I really wonder. Right. So that's a rarity, though. So I would say,
hold on a second. Hold on. We have to talk about this.
We can't
for a
get
second.
too sidetracked.
Yeah, we're not going to get sidetracked on buy or sell, but if there was ever a situation in terms of dysfunction that a player was entering into, like there were probably groans in that family, Brady Tkachuk getting drafted to the Ottawa Senators franchise. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's just a wild guess. And so he ends up there, and it's not all that different than Buffalo and what they've been going through. And yet here we are, the Sabres not able to shed the issues that they've had. And now Jack Eichel's on his way out the door, and he was an even more highly touted, highly paid player.
Yeah. Wow. The Sens haven't signed Jeff Skinner, and I like the Sabres free agent signings might've been the worst, but I digress.
Fair enough. Our second question here. I was really impressed with the Ducks in their opening night victory. They get a chance to go 2-0 tonight. I'm going to say, this young core, Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, I'm going to say they surprised us this year, and they are still in the playoff hunt come trade deadline time. Gregor, you buying or selling?
No, I'm selling. I don't get too hyped up on it. I can't remember the last time an all youth movement really worked. I understand what they're doing. Now, John Gibson was great in their opening game, and that's maybe the only sliver I would give. I think Anaheim's got some young pieces coming for the future, but I think once you get into the heart of the season and the players get, the veterans get ready for NHL hockey, I don't see Anaheim in the playoff mix come trade deadline.
Yeah, I'm going to sell as well, but I will say this. If they're anywhere close, like even within striking distance in March, then Dallas Eakins should be certainly in the conversation, or maybe the front runner for the Jack Adams, because I just don't see it with this roster. Fair
enough. 2 goals for Alex Ovechkin in his first game of the season. I'm going to say he gets to 50 this year. Frank, you buying or selling?
Selling. I think he gets, I had him at 44. So look, great start for the great 8. To get to 50 again, it's a ton of consistency. It's no nights off. It's difficult to do. It's why he's had a ton of them, but sometimes he goes a year or two in between, and the shortened year and all those things. So I don't know. For me, I think he's right in that 44, 45 range, falling just short.
I'm going to buy that he scores 50. A, because I love 50-goal seasons. B, I'd love him to see him tie the all-time record of most 50-goal seasons. He kind of got screwed out of it with the shortened season a few times. So I will say that Ovi gets to 50 because he finds a way to continue to stay healthy.
Yeah, that's been really one of the more remarkable parts of his career, is how consistent and healthy he's been.
As a horse.
Yeah. I'm going to give you guys an over-under question for number 4. Over under 3.5 50-goal scores this year. I'm going with the over on this one. I think it could be Ovi, Matthews, Pasternak. Maybe Draisaitl gets into that mix as well. Maybe there's another guy floating around who can get to 50. Gregor, over under 3.5 50-goal scores.
Well, at the start of the season, I said 4, so I will go over. Keep in mind, according to Leon Draisaitl, McDavid's fluffer. He's been working on the one-timer, and I think Connor McDavid is one of those guys who scores 50 goals this season. I think there's a real emphasis from 97 to become a better goal scorer, which is funny to say considering he's 5th most goals in the NHL the last 5 years, but he will get 50 for the first time.
It's funny. When you rattled off your names, Tyler, McDavid was the first guy I thought of. I'm like, well, if he's going to get to 151 points like I thought he is and predicted he will, then he's probably going to have a 50-goal season in there as well. So McDavid, Pasternak, Matthews, maybe Draisaitl. And then what if you throw an Ovechkin into the mix, as Jay says? It could easily be over that 3.5. And I think we have more 100-point scorers this year than we have had in the last number of years.
The last player I want to ask you guys about, I don't think he's going to get to 100 points, but I'm going to say Anze Kopitar takes his 5-point performance on opening night and rolls that into a season in which he will be a point per game or better. Frank, you buying or selling? Kopitar over a point per game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm buying that. He's 7% of the way there already, or whatever it is, 8%. Like, I don't know the math, but he's obviously off to a great start. And honestly, he hasn't been, I'd have to take a quick peek at his last number of years, but he hasn't been that far off from getting to the 82-point mark anyway. So, 50 and 56 last year, that was pretty darn close. So yeah, I'm gonna buy that.
Point a game player for sure. I think the LA Kings, they are one of the teams I feel is going to surprise this year and be much more competitive than they have been the last few seasons. And Frank and I alluded to it off the top. The acquisition of Danault is really going to allow them to play Anze Kopitar in many more offensive situations. I'm going to be fascinated to see what the change in as far as his offensive zone starts is this year compared to the last few seasons. So definitely, I think he's an 82 plus point player.
There you go. That is another round of Buy or Sell brought to you by our friends at DoorDash.
Jay, I'm going to have to ask you. Because I mentioned it there with Ovechkin. As a man who spends many a day at the farm, does healthy as a horse, does that actually mean something?
It does. Healthy as a horse, it's a great farm saying, because usually horses can live 23, 24. We had a horse live till he was like 26 one time. That was my mom's favorite. And you know what? I don't recall in all my years at the farm of ever really having a horse come up lame. I had to vaccinate cows, lots and different things, but man, horses, as long as you feed them a little bit of apples and carrots every now and then, they're fine. So healthy as a horse is definitely, I believe, as a farm guy, in my own experiences, it's accurate. And Ovi is definitely being that. That guy is, availability, dependability are so crucial outside of skill set. Because if you look at guys like what would have Mario Lemieux done if he had, didn't have the back injuries, and then of course obviously cancer, but that's that's a little bit different. But if you just look at
the best player of all time,
he might have been.
Some people already say that he is. Even with all due respect to Wayne Gretzky, that Mario Lemieux they think was a better player.
Well, I think it might have been. I think Mario Lemieux might have had more natural skill because he was 6'4", but I think Gretzky got the most out of his ability consistently.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. He also had a run where for the first 6-7 years in his career, the team wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And had to do a lot of it on his own.
Yeah, that's true for sure. And I know I saw a stat someone was putting out like what Mario Lemieux's point totals would have been if he had like just his points per game and just averaged that over 82 games. And it was still pretty ridiculous, but he still only had 200-point seasons. And that's what's kind of crazy. Like Wayne Gretzky at times I find he's so dominant that people try to find holes in his production to say, well, it was the 80s and they scored more. I'm like,
yeah, I'll take nothing away from him at all.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying you, but I do find that some of the younger generation, they try to find things. Oh, look at this. I'm like, all you got to do is compare him to his peers. Mm-hmm. No player in any generation ever dominated. Like he used to win the scoring race by 80 points. Everybody else played in the so-called watered down 80s. He was scoring 200 points and other guys were getting 120. Like it was ridiculous.
Yeah. And not to dive too deep into it again, but I just thought it was really interesting. His point as he was asked again about Ovechkin's chase of his record of goals. He was like, no one really thinks of me as a goal scorer. Like he said, yes, I scored a lot of goals, but he said, I was known more as a playmaker and a passer. And so for me, he's like, in terms of he didn't use the word legacy, but that has to be sort of the trend in what he was thinking is in terms of how people view him. He said it makes sense to him that Alex Ovechkin would be the greatest goal scorer of all time because of how difficult it is to score goals now.
Yeah, and that's fair. I agree. I look at Ovechkin and what he's done is amazing. I do think our perception of goal scorers, because Gretzky's right, like he didn't have the one-timer like Bossy or Brett Hall or Ovechkin, right? He didn't really score like that. And so I think, Gretzky kind of thought his way to a lot of goals. He was in the right position. At times, like everybody remembers his goal in the playoffs over Vernon's shoulder coming down the left wing, a rare slap shot from him top shelf. Those just didn't happen very often. And I think our perception of goal scorers is always like, you got to have power with it. You got to have a great one-timer. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's more flash, but Gretzky, when you score as many goals as he did, like you have a nose for the net. It's the great adage about there's no pitchers on the score sheet. And at the end of the night, it doesn't matter how many how you do it, it's how many. And he was, to me, until someone scores more, he is the greatest goal scorer. He's not the most dynamic goal scorer, but he's obviously the greatest goal scorer until Ovi passes him.
I just think Ovi already is the greatest goal scorer of all time.
Yeah,
it's infinitely
in his
harder
era
to do now.
for sure.
Yeah.
Because it's harder. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. The goaltenders have improved.
Overall,
There's
you
no
look
question.
at some of the goals that they scored on those guys in the 80s. Like, it's like, how many times do you see a goal from the top of the circle? That hardly ever happens anymore. You see that once every 5 games now.
Well, the goalies used to stand up all the time too. That was the big difference, right?
It's just
like
a
now,
different game.
Once the butterfly came in, it's a lot harder to score on the ice. There's no question about that. We got a really good guest today, Frank, coming up as we welcome to the program, courtesy of ESPN Plus, our big guest of the day, brought to you by ESPN Plus. They become the must-have for hockey fans. Great broadcast, and you can get access to more than 1,000 out-of-market NHL games and 75 weekly national games all year long. Plus, stream thousands of live events from the best leagues and the biggest tournaments in the world, exclusive originals, the complete 30 for 30 library, premium articles and fantasy tools, and more with ESPN Plus. Sign up right now at espnplus.com/DFO. And now we welcome into the woodjerseys.com studio a gentleman who was an 11th round pick. They don't even have 11th round picks anymore in the National Hockey League. He played 18 years of pro in the AHL and then in the NHL and is now just being named the assistant general manager of the Nashville Predators. Scott Nichol joins us. Scott, welcome to the DFO Rundown. How you doing?
Good, guys. Appreciate you having me today.
Well, that's 11th rounders, man. That's a great badge of honor to have because you just don't have it anymore. So before we get into your new role as a GM, I just kind of want to talk about how, you played 7 years in the AHL and the IHL before you became a regular NHLer. You did play 5 games, I think, in those first 7 years in Buffalo. Just kind of talk about the grind, Scott, of continuing to battle where, a lot of guys don't want to play 7 years of minor pro. Sometimes they go to Europe. What kept the dream alive for you of the NHL for 7 years in the minors?
Well, I think my first few, I was 11th round draft pick, so I knew I was just grinding to try and get a contract. I didn't even talk to Buffalo till the end of the year. And I think, we had a really good team in Portland. We had the Dead Marshes and Jason Weimers and Cale Hulses and you name it. Like, we had a really good team, did well, never heard from Buffalo all year. And then all of a sudden they called me and I don't know, June said, "Hey, you want a contract?" There wasn't much negotiating. So I said, "Sure, I'll take it." And there was my foot in the door. So I was 5'8" back in that era of 94, I guess, 93, 94. There's some big boys. So I was very happy they took a swing at me and, just grinded it out. Brent Peterson was a huge part of me getting drafted. He played in Buffalo, played in Hartford. And then he I think the janitor was sweeping up and Buffalo came up to him and said, "Hey, how's the Scott Nichol kid?" And Petey's like, "You got to take him." Pump my tires, and they ended up taking me. And it's a funny story. He called me. Buffalo didn't call me. He called me, left the answering machine message on the answering of the old school answering machine messages. So I wasn't even at the draft. I was out doing something, and he comes to me, or he leaves a message, say, "Hey, Scotty, it's Petey. Give me a call. You got drafted." I was like, "Sweet." So I call him. He's like, "You got drafted Buffalo." And he's like, "Don't embarrass me," he says to me. I'm like, "Hey, thanks for the vote of confidence, Petey." So no, it's all good. Just hung in there, just grinding, just battled. Just, my first year was just getting used to the American League and just trying to be an everyday pro. I think as a young kid coming in, I think your second year is always the hardest year to establish yourself because, you're not the shiny new toy. You're not the rookie. You have some expectations. They've also signed some free agents. They've also got their draft picks. So in my experience, that was my hardest. My second year was the hardest year. And we had John Tortorella as our coach my second year. So he brought in a lot of his guys. Like I said, I wasn't a very big player. So I had to be patient. Like, I probably didn't play till maybe November. So I was just kind of hanging out, practicing, and we got some injuries and we didn't start off very well. And then we ended up winning the Calder Cup, and our line was a huge part of that. So, and then every year I just kind of tried to, gain more confidence, go to another camp. Like, I was thinking just the other day, I think I've been to like 23 NHL camps, like just going through your whole process every year. You got a little bit better, gain a few more exhibition games. My first year, no exhibition games. Second, you just try and just climb the ladder that way and stay patient.
Your two of your former teammates, Nathan Dempsey and Jason Strudwick, I guess you guys ran a lot of fun in Chicago. They told me that they used to call you the little ball of hate. You mentioned you're 5'8". Did you have to play did you create that persona to realize if I'm going to survive, I got to be an angry player?
Yeah, I think you always have to draw the line in the sand at some point. Like, you can't get pushed around. We all scored goals in junior hockey. And then you got to figure out how you're going to survive in the American League or the NHL. And how I survived, I wasn't going to score in the NHL. I don't have that kind of skill set, but I do have some kind of skill and I can play energy. I really focused on our face-offs. Brent Peterson was fantastic for that. So you have an identity, you have a role. I got to play the last minute of the game, 6-on-5, 5-on-6, because I could win a face-off. I could kill penalties. And then, it's at the end of the day, you're all entertainers. So you have to entertain and do some things that maybe some people don't want to do. And that's what kept me in the league.
662 games, Scott, quite an accomplishment. I'm wondering, just given all that you spoke about and your path to the NHL, how much do you think that helped you immediately then transitioning to director of player development for the Preds, starting out off the ice and in the front office, just all the experience that you had and sort of dealing with all types of different players that come through your organization?
Yeah, I think that's set. I think my last probably 4 years, I was pretty much player development as a player. I came from, I've gone through it all. I have had both my ACLs redone. I had my shoulder done my first 3 years in pro. So I was already like, man, this is hard. I couldn't stay healthy. I had, the style that I played against the big guys, I would just go all out and I just get banged up. I couldn't play a whole season. So as I got kind of stronger and more mature and then kind of picked my spots a little bit better, I was healthy. And then, like you guys said, I played 7 years in the American League. My last year in the IHL, I actually had an IHL contract. I didn't have an NHL contract. And the following year, Calgary called and they offered me an NHL contract for 2 years. And I was probably 5 years old, and good experience. We went to the Calder Cup final 3 of my 6 years in Rochester. And I knew this was my last kick at the camp. So I was like, okay, well, I poured everything into it that summer, came to Calgary. I beat Jerome McGinley out for the fittest flame. And right then the guys were like, who's this guy? They signed me probably be the captain of the American League. And I just had a great camp. Calgary didn't make playoffs the last few years. Greg Gilbert was the coach. They were looking for a spark. And it was just like kind of like, and I was a Calgary kid. It was like a perfect storm. And back then that was Chuck Kovasu was our big guy coming out of junior. He didn't sign with Calgary that year. So that opened up a spot. If Chuck would have signed, I probably wouldn't have played a game in the NHL. It's so funny how things kind of evolve, and you have to be lucky to make it. And there was a little crack in the door, and I took advantage of it. And I never, the only time I got sent to the minors after that was for a little conditioning stint. So it was a good run for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, congrats. And we're glad to have you with us here. But I wanted to ask you, just not even thinking back to when your career first started, but even since you've been off the ice and started in player development, how much has the player development game changed? Like, it used to be before you send these guys to the minors and, off you go and have a great season. We'll check in with you occasionally, to now there's constant contact, constant dialogue. And it's not just the guys that are in your system. It's also guys that are with their junior team or with their college team, that there's probably someone either seeing them in the building and in person quite often, and if not, talking to them multiple times a week. No?
Yeah, it is. It's all about communication. I think the young guys now, they want dialogue. They want to know where they stand, where they're at, what's going on. And when I first started, David Poyle retired in St. Louis. He called me and asked if I want to do player development. Marty Jelena was our guy before that, and he went to Calgary as assistant coach. So I loved it. I thought it was a great gig. I got to live in upstate New York. That was kind of our house. We had a house in Rochester, New York, and then I could just fly in and see our young draft picks in college and junior over in Europe, and just build a relationship, build a trust, build that they're part of our foundation of our organization, because they are. And we just kind of go, and the first few years were a little tough because I didn't know the players very well. It took a while to build that camaraderie, I guess. And then seeing these guys go to the NHL, see them progress, see them get bigger and stronger and more mature. And, now you see them get married and having young kids. Like it's a fun process to see how these kids grow and get better. And it takes a lot of people to do it. Like you see, okay, whatever, Ellie Tolvin, and he's in the NHL right now. But you forget how many people touch him along the way, between the player development guys, the Milwaukee guys and the minors, your agent, your skills coach, your skating coach. Like there's a lot of people that help them get there. It's just, you don't just airdrop these young kids into the NHL.
Scott, how important is it for players to feel like they've got somebody on their side? Because I think you talk to, like, excluding the elite of the elite, a lot of guys, you kind of need someone that likes you as a player and, maybe goes to bat for you. You mentioned Peterson was that guy for you. As somebody in player development, was that a part of the job, is to make sure the players know that they got somebody who really believes in them?
For sure. Even like, I think that's why we have our development camps as well. Like I never had a development camp. So you bring these kids in and they get to know the trainers, they get to know the head coach, they get to know our management team, they get to know all the Milwaukee staff or your minor league staff. So when they do come in out of, say, college, like the college kids don't sometimes they won't come to our training camp for 3 or 4 years because they can't, because of the NCAA rules. So all of a sudden they're 23 years old and it's their first training camp, and then they're expected to make an impact at it. It's hard. So that's why we have development camp. So when they do, it's kind of like a little bit of a gradual stepping stone. The first year at development camp, they're, a little shy like everybody, and you're just kind of figuring things out. By their third development camp, they're usually leading the camp. They're usually one of the leaders or the guys that kind of take over. So then the next progression is they come to main camp with the big boys, play a little rookie tournament. So it is, you always want somebody on your side, somebody you can talk to, somebody that's, a familiar face that you can kind of lean on, because it's a hard business. It's hard to, every year there's 7-8 kids getting drafted in your organization, and they're trying to knock guys off in the NHL to get contracts.
You mentioned how you beat out Jerome McGinley for the fittest flame. I'm sure that must have been a good little chirp that you were able to throw back at him every now and then. He's ultra competitive, but
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, he's in the best shape, and some I find some people kind of mock that. Well, what does that even mean? But can you talk about the importance to a player when they come to camp to see how, like, when you saw yourself as the fittest flame, like, I'm assuming that was like, okay, I know I put in the work. And for somebody now who's in management, how much of that is just like a subliminal messaging where all of a sudden you're just like, hey, look at this guy, like, he's put in the work. That doesn't mean he's going to be an NHL player automatically, but how much does the test results influence the management?
Well, I think in this business, the only thing you really can control is how good a shape you come in, right? That's really all you can control. At the end of the day, somebody's going to beat you out of your job. It's inevitable. Like the league's getting younger and faster, and father time catches up. So I think the only thing you can control is that. So you come in, even mindset wise, you come in, you're prepared. You're like, I put everything into it. At the end of the day, if I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And it also shows management that you're committed. We're not looking over your shoulder saying, hey, you got to do this, this, or this. Like, you come in, you have an attitude, a swagger, you have confidence, you have a routine, and you just go for it. So that it doesn't carry like the whole weight, but it does kind of add to your profile. Like, sometimes, you're going to struggle if you don't play. You only have 2 practices and you usually have your first exhibition game. So, it gives you probably a little bit more leash, where if you come in and you're not in great shape, it's an easy excuse for coaches or whatever to say, okay, this guy's not prepared or he didn't do enough. So I tell our prospects, our young guys, that's the only thing you can control. Control how you come into shape, and then we'll see from there.
So, Scott, the Preds announced on Monday that you were promoted to assistant general manager. You've been the GM of the Milwaukee Admirals the last few years. Tell us more about your new title. Is it same sort of similar role, just getting the additional title? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same role. So I'm still going to do our director of player development. I'm going to look after a Milwaukee team, and then maybe travel a little bit more with the big guys. But yeah, we have a really good management team between, Brian Poyle, myself, Jeff Kelty. Jeff Kelty does a lot of all the amateur and pro stuff. Brian Poyle does a lot of the contracts, a lot of the business side. We all bring a little bit different. I'm kind of more of just the hockey guy, and David just oversees all of us and lean on him and listen to his stories and his experiences, and just trying to be a sponge and just, try and take it all in. So it is a really good group. I've loved it. It's almost my management, I guess, path has almost been like my hockey career. I started as a player development. I was the only player development. We had one guy, and I'd be bouncing around all over to see all our kids. And then it just gradually, David's like, hey, why don't you come sit in the pro meetings? Hey, why don't you come sit in some of the amateur meetings? Because these are the guys we're going to draft, and you're going to have to, take over. And then when Paul Fenton went to Minnesota, they're like, hey, do you want to run Milwaukee? So that's my first time in like that kind of management side of things. And so it is. I've just been kind of, we have really good people in this organization, and it is a little bit like it's really like a family-oriented organization. David's been here since day one, and he trusts people, and lets them do their job. And yeah, well, we make mistakes, but we also learn from them. So it's been a really good ride for sure so far.
Given that you touch all those different aspects, as you've seen a little bit more of it, aside from player development, obviously you really like that part of it. Is there something else that has caught your eye that you really are interested in terms of the management side?
I love building a team. Like that's part of it. I think that's the, on my side where I get to see our young prospects, but I also get to see where they fit into our team in Milwaukee, so I think kids, they have to have a special, and they all do because they've been drafted and they do real well at their level, but they have to have some kind of identity. They have to try and separate themselves. So we try and, with my position where I can see these kids, their foundation as a youth or an amateur player and where they come into pro, they don't really change their foundation that much. We're just trying to mold them and just trying to guide them into, the element that they have or the skill set, what makes them special. So that's what I enjoy building the team. It's fun. It's fun to see them kind of all come together, your vision and where it goes. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Scott, you, as a player, you knew what you had to work on to improve, right? Every summer, you're probably working on some different thing. Hey, at very minimum, I'm going to come in great shape. What do you work on in management? Like, how do you self-evaluate to know you're improving? And what are the areas that you've wanted to improve, from player personnel to now as assistant GM? How do you work on those things?
Probably mine would be patience. Like I want it to happen now. Like if I want to go after a guy, I want to sign right this second. I want to get him in the lineup. But that's just how I'm wired. And that's how usually most hockey players are wired. Like such a result-based business and the games, and we play 82 games. So that's probably, sometimes I just got to, pump the brakes a little bit and just kind of step back. And that's where David's fantastic. And we talk through it and nothing's really made on a like a whim or anything like that. It's amazing how much we talk through every single scenario, every trade or everybody who gets sent down or called up, or it's people on the outside don't understand how much time we put into that. Because at the end of the day, you're a person, you have a family, you got kids in school. Like it's not fantasy hockey or fantasy football. It's like every decision you make, there's always repercussions and because of it. So that's something that I try and, work on every day.
When you look at the Preds organization, because I think a lot of people, when they think Nashville, they think like defenseman and goaltending factory, right? It's been like this never-ending line of quality developing defensemen. Can you put a reason as to why the Preds have been so much more successful on developing elite D-men compared to forwards?
I don't know. It's I don't do the draft, but it's a good question. But we've had some really good leaders on the back end. If it goes from Timonen to, then we had Shea Weber, Ryan Suter. Like we've always had some kind of like a staple or a guy a pillar on D that could teach somebody. Like Shea Weber taught Seth Jones. Seth Jones got to lean on Shea Weber. Shea Weber got to lean on Timonen. So it's like. And then now with the Ekholm signing and Yossi, now these young kids of the Fabros and the Carriers, they can lean on those guys and pick their brains. So it's been a really good constant wheel, I guess you could say. And it kind of is insulated those guys because it's hard being a D-man in the NHL. So I think that's a huge part of it. And we do a really good job drafting and developing the D-man. And it's sad to see some of the guys that we've had move on and do well because they have done a good job for sure.
All right, Jay, let's play a little rapid fire with Scott.
Okay, now before we get to that, Scott, I just want to ask you quickly. I always like to go back many years to your first NHL goal. Do you remember it?
I do remember it, yeah.
Against the Detroit Red Wings, is that correct?
Yeah, some guy, Hasek maybe, Dominic Hasek maybe.
What a flex that is.
So
Like, tell me about that feeling after 7 years in the minors. It was, you had your first NHL assist in game 3 that season for Calgary. And then it's your 4th game of the year. It's in Detroit against Dominic Cachuck, obviously a Hall of Famer now. Well, like, what's the emotion either at the time or maybe after that game? And regardless of what would have happened the rest of your career, how big was that goal for you?
It's funny how the hockey circles go around, because Dominic Hasek was my roommate in Buffalo, because nobody else wanted a room with him. So they put the young kid, rookie kid in there. So funny how it all kind of comes full circle. But yeah, I don't even know why I was on the ice. I think it was like a 5-on-3 or something like that. And Gibby threw me out there on the ice, and I think it went off my shin pad, to be totally honest with you, and went in. So I'll take him any way I can. But I want to say maybe Rob Niedermeyer and Dean McCammon might have assisted on it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I was curious about, how Scotty Nichol, after 7 years in the minors, his first NHL goal is a power play goal. So I wanted to know the backstory. I didn't know. I was looking at your minutes. You weren't necessarily a big PP guy, but there you were against Hasek scoring on the power play.
Just a great coaching move, I guess. Who knows?
All right, Scotty, we like to play rapid fire, where the only rule is you have to answer the questions. Okay. All right. So if you're going out for, after a game or something to Tootsie's, what's your beverage of choice?
Bud Light.
Bud Light. Okay. What is the number one advice that you give to all young players at their first camp with the Predators?
Just be yourself. Play your style. Don't try and play anybody else's style. You're here for a reason.
Hardest part of evaluating pro hockey players from a scouting perspective?
The other team's pretty good too. They have good players as well.
So you're saying that, like, when you're watching your guys, you have to keep in mind that the other team is just as good?
I do, yeah. Like, when I see our guys, how we played last night, or even just like on face-offs, like I take, maybe because I played in the league, but it's the NHL or it's the American League. There's really good players on the other side of the puck as well. So I like to gauge our guys against who they're going against.
Small player in today's game compared to a small player like Scotty Nichol in the 90s and the 2000s. The game has definitely changed, but it's still, size can be an advantage. What's the most important thing that small players need to have to be successful in the NHL?
Speed, probably, quickness, agility, just dog on a bone mentality. Get it to play inside the dots. Like, you can have a big guy who's soft. I'd rather take a little guy who's got some jam and juice who'll play underneath and play inside guys' equipment.
If Scotty Nichol's playing men's league hockey, is he still the little ball of hate?
I hate Scotty Nichol as a men's league hockey player. I'm like, everything I despise, sauce through the middle of the ice, backhand everywhere. Yeah, it's ugly. So I retired.
Did you retire because men's league just isn't as competitive as we were used to playing, and it was hard to dial it down?
I played a long time. I played Thursday nights in Rochester with Randy Cunningworth and a bunch of guys. So I was just like 1 year and then I was done. But it was fun. It was fun it's a good transition after, but no more. Coach the kids instead.
If you could only pick one, Shea Weber, Ryan Suter, who is a better Predators defenseman?
Yikes. I'll take Shea Weber today. Just maybe it's because it's the golf thing. Everybody wants to drive the ball 400 yards. So maybe just because I want a 120-mile-an-hour slap shot, maybe that's why I picked Shea Weber.
How much would, if you see a guy block a Shea Weber shot, do you automatically scout? Does he get a higher scouting rate just for the lunacy of willing to do it?
Yeah, I think he needs a personality test for sure to see he's got all his marbles there. But yeah, that's just the way it even back in the old days, like, you had one guy that blocked shots. Now you got everybody blocking shots now, from your best players to your fourth line guys. So the game has changed.
Is the game better with so many block shots?
It's harder. It's harder to get shots through. There's so many layers. And then you got a pretty good goalie who's 6'6" that takes up a lot of the room. So I don't know if it's better, but it takes a lot more skill to get a goal nowadays than ever did.
There's a lot of nicknames. They call it Nash Vegas. So for any fans who are listening and they're going to take their first road trip to come watch a game in Nashville, what are the 2 must things they have to do outside of the game in Nashville?
Go to Broadway and then probably have some hot chicken. That's pretty famous here.
Ooh, hot chicken. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on the new gig. And if it's anything like your playoff career, we'll probably be talking to you as a GM sometime down the road.
All right, boys. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Good luck this year.
Thank you.
That was Scotty Nichol joining us on the DFO Rundown. And before we go, Frank, breaking news, Charlie McAvoy, 8 years, $9.5 million. The D-men across the NHL are getting paid.
Yeah, once we saw that Seth Jones deal this summer, that sort of rewrote and set the bar on terms of where everyone would land after the fact. And Charlie McAvoy certainly in that sort of conversation and category. And obviously the Boston Bruins see it the same way.
Well, a big thanks again to Scott Nichol for joining us, and he'll be a name to watch, Frank, down the road. Guy who's put in his time, working his way up the ladder, and those are the type of guys become assistant GMs. You know, he mentioned Fenton, and there's others around the league. Don't be surprised in a few years that Scott Nichol is a GM for a club, maybe even when Dave Poile eventually retires for the Nashville Predators. Thanks as always, Frank. That's the DFO Rundown brought to you by Fantrax, the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry. Create or join the league right now. Go to fantrax.com/DFO Rundown. Sign up your team today, and you could win a signed Nathan McKinnon jersey. Frank, have a great weekend, and we will talk on Monday. A weekend, the first regular season weekend. There'll be lots of stories to break down.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode. Delivered by DoorDash.